All right, thanks to everyone who is joining us this afternoon. We will get it started in one moment on our presentation on books on grief for teens. Once again, thank everyone for joining us this morning. My name is Jody, and I am the adult programmer at the Fredericksburg branch. It is my privilege today to introduce Mary Bevins from Mary Washington Healthcare Grief Support Services. Mary is doing a series of online classes or online presentations this summer for us on books for grief for different ages. Last month, she did a wonderful one on children, if you want to go back and watch that. And she's doing today on teens, and we'll be doing one in August for adults. Mary, we're glad to have you today. And as a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will get or comments, sorry, not chat, and I will get them to Mary after her presentation. Mary, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thanks, Jody. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be back. I really enjoyed doing the presentation on children's grief books. So like Jody said, if you are interested in that, please feel free to go back and find that one, which was from the first Tuesday in June. Oh my gosh, it's July already. Wow. Well, I am happy to be back. And today we are going to be talking about teens and grief. And then I have a whole bunch of books to share with you, which I am very excited about. So first, just wanted to get started and kind of lay the groundwork. So what is grief? Grief refers to a person's reaction to loss, comprised of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that change over time. And I just want to make a point here that this is a lot of different feelings. Some of the ones we associate with grief, like sadness or anger, maybe depression, but also feelings of anxiety or guilt or even relief. So grief is very complex. And then mourning. So we often use mourning to describe the outward expression of grief. So like crying, maybe visiting the gravesite. And we also use it to describe the period of time after the loss. I always think of the Victorian women all dressed in black in their kind of year of mourning, that they would wear all black to symbolize that they were grieving. So teens and grief. If you did watch the first presentation I did on kids and grief, some of this will seem familiar because there are a lot of commonalities across the lifespan as grieving people. But this one really is focused on teens. And then I will certainly point out some similarities and differences. So teens' understanding of death is that they do understand that death is permanent and that it's irreversible. However, this is the time when teens start kind of thinking through a lot of those existential questions. And that's true regardless of if a teen has experienced a death of a loved one or not. They're thinking about these questions of the meaning of life, of death, traumatic events, and kind of what these things signify, how these things impact us. Some common responses to grief for teens are withdrawal from family or other supports. This is really tricky for parents and caregivers navigating grief with their family because we want our teen to communicate with us. We want them to tell us how they're doing and to kind of be part of some of these family memorials and rituals. And many teens' natural inclination is to kind of pull back from family and other supports during the time when they're grieving. Teens are very focused on connections with their peers. We'll see in several of these things that these are also just common teen behaviors, that this is a time when teens are starting to seek that independence from their parents and caregivers and really start focusing on those connections with their peers. Now, what this doesn't mean is that they are kind of constantly talking to their peer about the loss and the death. Sometimes the peer relationships are more for distraction or just comfort, knowing that somebody is kind of there on their side, on their team, aside from their caregiver or support from their family. So these relationships with peers are extremely important. And actually, in many of the books that we'll talk about today, this is a common theme, is the teen really relying on their peer support to kind of help them work through and process some of their grief feelings and behaviors. One thing that teens often engage in is increased risk-taking behavior. This could mean alcohol or drug use, driving too fast. And again, this is something that we see from teens generally, but it is an increased risk factor for teens who are grieving. An inability to concentrate, which can lead to difficulty in school. There is some literature that shows that some teens kind of flip to the opposite and kind of go towards the route of perfectionism. This just kind of goes to show that all people, including teens, grieve differently, and we all have our own unique ways that our grief is expressed in our journey. Difficulty sleeping, changes in appetite. This could be a decrease in appetite or an increase in appetite. Uncomfortable discussing the death with their caregivers, their death or their experience of the death with their parents or caregivers. So this kind of goes back to the first two about withdrawing from family or other supports and are focused on connections with peers, that most teens don't want to kind of sit down and talk about their feelings with their caregivers. It feels uncomfortable. And unfortunately, this means that we might not know in detail kind of how our teen is coping with the loss. And we'll talk about kind of what to do with that on the next slide. Teens often experience unpredictable and intense emotions. Again, this is kind of one of the classic hallmark things that we talk about with our teens, that this is a time when developmentally and hormonally they are changing. And so add on the layer of grief and the complexities that brings. And we often see these kind of dramatic outbursts. And the term unpredictable, I think, is a good one, because sometimes it's something that the teen feels set off or triggered or whatever, that the parent or caregiver or teacher, whoever it is who the interaction is with, are kind of like taken aback, like, I have no idea why this is happening. So just remembering that it's often that grief layer kind of expressing itself these unpredictable times. A worry about safety of self and others, and kind of goes along with fear of another death happening. These are actually things that we see throughout the lifespan, that the children and teens and adults all kind of have this new fear of another death happening or worrying about, their friends and family. And I think part of this is that we do a good job of kind of living without remembering that our loved ones will someday die. And so when a death happens, it kind of brings all that to the forefront and wondering, who's next? Who else could die? If this could happen to this person, what else can happen? Attempts to take on the caregiving or parent role. This is primarily in families where the teen is maybe one of the older siblings, and then there are some younger siblings where the teen might kind of take on those caregiving or parental roles. But this could also certainly be directed at the living parent if one of the parents have passed away, and the teen essentially being parentified, whether because they are being kind of asked to subconsciously, or because that's just how they feel like what they need to do to cope. So just kind of being on the lookout for that. Teens who have experienced the death of a loved one have increased risk of suicide and self-harm behaviors. And then hypervigilance and increased sensitivity to noise, movement, and light, which we often associate, for those of you who are familiar with mental health, we associate hypervigilance and this increased sensitivity to PTSD. And so I want to make a distinction that all trauma is grief, but not all grief is trauma. But that we still see some of these symptoms and signs, the difficulty sleeping, changes in appetite, risk of self-harm and hypervigilance in teens who are grieving. This is one of the ways that they are coping. And so how to help? So we want to reinforce safety and security. And this generally is outright saying, like, I know this was scary. You are safe. You don't have the disease that the person died from. We can take precautions, wear your seatbelt in the car, whatever it is that happened when the person passed away. What are some things that we can reinforce that your teen is still safe? Maintain routines. This can be really tricky. When somebody passes away, it really disrupts the whole routine for everybody involved. Now, sometimes it's a little easier to jump back in to kind of go back to what the routine was, but sometimes routines have to change. We talked about this a little bit in the kids' books presentation that I gave. And so what can we do to kind of reestablish these routines where the child is still kind of doing the same things they were doing before the death? Allow for expression of feelings without trying to change, fix, or take them away. This is tricky because our inclination as parents and caregivers is that we don't want our person to be hurting, right? We don't want our teen to be hurting and to be carrying these difficult feelings. But when we try to fix the problem, when we try to fix the feeling, it often causes teens, and honestly, any person, to shut down and to feel invalidated. And it makes you less willing to share the next time. So do your best to kind of listen and validate and acknowledge the feelings without trying to change or fix them. Answer questions honestly. This is, again, one that's tricky, especially if there are some difficult circumstances surrounding the death that are hard to talk about. So do your best to answer questions honestly and not shy away from difficult truths. Have patience with the teen's wide range of emotions. I think if you have one takeaway from this presentation, I would take that one, which is that just to have some grace and some patience. And even though these outbursts are really trying, and likely you as the parent or caregiver or other supportive person are also dealing with your own grief, which can make it even more difficult to act with patience. But just trying to keep that in mind, that patience is going to get you a long way when you're dealing with these teens' emotions. And then modeling appropriate grief expressions and ways to care for yourself. So this might be, making, like, crying in front of your teen. It might be journaling, attending a support group, going to see a therapist. This could be a lot of things. Making sure you're eating healthy food and drinking enough water. So doing these things, you don't even need to use your words. You can just be doing these things that are caring for yourself and having your teen see that you're doing them. So modeling those things. Provide choices whenever possible. This kind of goes back to that sense of safety and loss of control, that this is a time when teens are feeling, all kids, you heard this if you listen to the kids' grief presentation as well, this kind of feeling of the loss of control. This thing happened to you and disrupted your whole life. So where can we regain some of that control? And providing choices, even in really small ways, like what to eat for dinner, can be really helpful. Assist teens in making connections with support systems. So we saw in the previous slide that this is something that teens naturally do, is withdraw from their support system. So can we foster those connections in some way, helping them stay connected to their softball team and their coach, making sure that they can participate in after-school clubs. So finding ways to get them to engage with their support systems. Ask open-ended questions. This is very important because we know that most teens, if you ask them any question, even an open-ended question, are going to answer you with as few words as possible. But by asking the open-ended questions, you're inviting the teen to share. So it might not be that they share in that moment, but you're signaling to them that you are open to and wanting to communicate with them about their thoughts and feelings. And then, of course, seek professional help. This is extremely important if your teen is expressing any suicidal behaviors or thoughts or any self-harm. But this could be for any teen who is grieving or going through any mental health challenges, to get some additional help. And again, to broaden their support system, to find other people that they can trust and confide in. All right, so now we're going to jump into our books. All of the ones that I'm going to talk about first are available at the Central Rappahannock Regional Library. Many of them are found at the Fredericksburg branch, some were at the Howell branch, but you can search on the website or ask a librarian to find which specific branch they are. And then, of course, you can put them on hold if they're not available at the moment. I also want to give a quick shout out to Owen, the teen librarian at the Fredericksburg branch, was a great help and offered some suggestions to kind of bolster my list when I ran out of ideas. So thank you to Owen. So this first book, I absolutely adore. Loved it so much I bought my own copy, which I'm going to read you a quote from the book in a moment. It's called All the Blues in the Sky, and it's by Renee Watson. It follows the story of Sage, whose best friend died. This is geared towards younger teens. What I like about it is that it's written in verse. You'll hear that in the quote that I'm going to read. And it has just so much helpful grief language. And I think for all people who are grieving, sometimes it just helps to have the language to talk about the loss. And to kind of put words to what your experience is and what you're feeling. The other thing I like about this book is that Sage participates in a grief support group at her school with other teens who have experienced loss. And one of the complexities of this book is that she is wrestling both with guilt about the way that her best friend died, and also that she kind of is struggling with this comparison of her loss that was sudden. She didn't have a chance to say goodbye with some of the other kids in the grief support group who had their loved one died after an illness. So they did have a chance to say goodbye. And it's really an interesting distinction that she explores. And it also talks about her friend relationships. She has a close relationship with her great aunt, who is kind of her fill-in grandmother. So it explores just the peer relationships, the helpful grief language. It's a really exceptional book. So I'm going to right now read to you. It's technically 2 pages, but because it's in verse, I'll just show you real quick. Whoops, where am I? There I am. It does have, they're kind of short. So this is a quote from All the Blues in the Sky, and it's right at the beginning, so I'm not spoiling anything. When adults tell you about dying, they talk about your pet or an elderly neighbor or your grandpa or your grandma. And when they tell you about dying, they tell you it's okay to cry. They tell you it's okay to be angry. They tell you it's even okay to laugh and still have fun. But what they don't tell you is that the sadness and anger and laughter don't wait their turn. No. Sometimes sadness and anger and laughter come all at once on the same day, sometimes in a burst, sometimes a slow trickle. They don't tell you that sometimes you don't even know what to call what you're feeling because you've never felt it before. Maybe they don't tell you this because they don't know, or maybe because there are so many things to teach a child, they forget to mention this. If I live long enough to be an adult, and if I have children when I am an adult, I will tell them. And I will tell them that sometimes you go to sleep crying and wake up crying, and that life after losing someone you love feels like one big ocean of sorrow, and you might feel like you are drowning. But always, there is something to hold on to keep you afloat. So that is essentially the first page of the book, and it just jumps off from there. So highly recommend this one. Next up, we have The Flip Side, which is a graphic novel by Jason Walls. This also is about best friend loss. And I would say in any of the books that are loss specific, they still have really general grief themes that pertain to anybody who's grieving. So the story is about these specific types of loss, but I think the grief nuggets and the lessons that we learn from them are universal. This does have a few content warning, trigger warnings for suicide and self-harm, so just be mindful of that. This explores the story of Theo after his best friend, Evan, dies of cancer. And he just is feeling like Nobody understands his pain and his sadness. Everybody is comforting Evan's mom, rightfully so, but it's like he's a forgotten griever, which is a very common experience when you lose a friend, even a cousin, these kind of relationships that aren't your immediate family. And honestly, kids in general, teens in general, tend to be forgotten grievers. So I love that this kind of explores those feelings. It also has really incredible artwork. And it's a really cool book. Owen and I were talking when I found this book at the library and just noticing how heavy it is. It has full color pages. It's a fairly thick book, but because it's a graphic novel, you can flip through really easily and quickly. But Theo ends up meeting this girl, Emma, in the flip side after his world gets flipped upside down. And she's experiencing her own type of grief. And so they are chased by their grief monsters, which is a really beautiful metaphor that we use in the grief world to help kids and teens process their grief. Kind of what does your grief monster look like? So I love that Jason Walls has incorporated that into this book. And it really explores this kind of adventure that they go on and explores those really deep feelings of hopelessness and depression and grief and loss. This one, it says, if you look it up, that it's for ages 12 to 17. I would probably gear it towards older teens, partly because it is kind of this metaphor for the hopelessness and depression to be on the flip side that younger teens might not kind of fully catch on to. But also just because of some of the themes in the book. And it is has kind of a dark vibe that I would probably steer this more towards older teens. Next up, we have I'd Rather Burn Than Bloom by Shannon C.F. Rogers. This was actually the first book that I read when I was reading through all of these teen books, and I was totally blown away. This is a really beautiful story. I think what I love about this, it follows Marisol, who is a Filipina American. Her mom is from the Philippines. Her dad is a white man from New Mexico. I think his origin state is maybe different, but the story takes place in New Mexico. And so what I love about this, though, is that Marisol is so real. She's a very believable character, that she's gone through this really traumatic experience of losing her mom suddenly. She's experiencing a lot of guilt. This does have another content warning for alcohol and drug use. There is some sexual behavior as well. So probably another one that's better suited for older teens, although in the story, Marisol is in 10th and 11th grade. Like I said, it is about the loss of her mom. And what I like too about the story is it flips back and forth between the past and the present. So you really see this dynamic between Marisol and her mom, and some of the conflicts that they've had. They have that type of relationship where they love each other, but they just cannot have a conversation without arguing. It's like everything turns into an argument. And so as Marisol is kind of looking back and reflecting on these events, she really is trying to kind of piece together who she is in light of this relationship with her mom. And she even is exploring her identity as a Filipina person because her mom died. She kind of is really asking, if I have no tie to this culture, can I still call myself Filipina? Another interesting part of this story is that Marisol had this group of friends that she'd had since she was very young. And when her mom dies, those relationships become really difficult for her. And she actually ends up finding a totally new friend group to kind of help her delve into some of these grief and loss feelings. But like I said, she is a very believable character, and you really see the struggles that she has in her inability to find healthy coping. She has a difficult relationship with her dad. And it also trails a little bit. She has a younger brother and kind of shows some of his grief journey as well. But very well written. I definitely recommend this one. Next up, we have The Undead Truth of Us. This one and one other one, I was kind of like, that's not really my style. I'm not sure if I want to read it, but I'm so glad I did. This is by Brittany S. Lewis. It follows the story of Zari, like she's called Z in the book. It is also about parent loss. The book starts with her basically watching her mom turn into a zombie, which is why I wasn't didn't think I would like it because I'm not usually into zombie books and movies. But it really is a metaphor for this kind of journey that Zari goes on, where she's trying to find out why her mom turned into a zombie. And the kind of quote that encapsulates it is that love can change you for good or for dead. And of course, zombies are the undead. So she has a blog where she's kind of talking about the zombies. But again, this is one where she is able to explore and process her grief in the context of her friendships. Another unique feature of this book is that Zari was raised by a single mom and didn't have a relationship with her dad. And in fact, we kind of turns out he didn't really want to have anything to do with her. And so after her mom dies, she has to move in with her aunt. And Zari's feeling is that her aunt doesn't want her to be there. She's an inconvenience, kind of thoughts like that. So that's also part of her grief journey, is this kind of having to figure out this relationship with her aunt, who's now her primary caregiver. And it kind of adds some complexities to her grief. Something I talk about when I do grief presentations is that our loss doesn't happen in isolation. And I think for Zari in particular, when I'm looking at these characters in these books, her loss came with a lot of other changes. And so I think it's an interesting perspective to explore. She becomes friends with a new neighbor. His name is Bo, and he is half zombie, half human. And so this kind of leads to her journey of trying to figure out why her mom became a zombie and why Bo would be. And it explores their friendship and kind of their journey. This one does have alcohol and drug use as well. I did put this one on kind of the older teens list as well. Next up is the other book that I wasn't sure that I was going to add to this list. It's called World Made of Glass. And the reason why I wasn't sure about it is because it really focuses heavily on the AIDS epidemic in the mid 80s. So my thought was that maybe it wouldn't be relatable to teenagers today who really AIDS isn't like a big important part of their life. I certainly remember growing up and hearing about AIDS. And that was during a time when there were still a lot of misconceptions. So I ended up very much enjoying this book, World Made of Glass by Amy Polanski. It is definitely geared towards middle school, young teens. It has a lot of very accessible poetry. The main character, Iris, and her dad write acrostic poems to each other. And it is her dad who passes away. One thing I like about this book is that there's a period of time at the beginning of the book when her dad is still living, but he is dying. And then there's the part following the death when she is kind of learning how to live with and cope with this really tremendous loss. It explores friend relationships. It explores step parents. There's a lot of really interesting themes in this book. And I like it because while it does focus on the AIDS epidemic and kind of the difficulties that people who were affected by AIDS during that time experienced, it also, again, kind of really speaks to these universal grief themes. So even if your loved one died from something else other than AIDS, I still think this is a really good book for that kind of middle school, young teen age to kind of read about these grief feelings and experiences and to normalize that this is what a lot of teens go through, these feelings and experiences. Another thing I like about this book, I'll just say real quickly, is that Iris's primary emotion is anger. And so one of the things that she does is try to find an outlet for that anger. And I like it too, because there's some of the adults in the book really validate her anger. And I think that's really important. We talked before about not trying to fix or change what your teen is experiencing, the feeling that they're experiencing. And I think that this book really encapsulates that well, that the adults in Iris's life are really respectful of her feelings. And I like this book a lot. It's very accessible. Next up, we have Dancing at the Pity Party. It's by Tyler Fetter. And It is about, she's 19 when her mom dies. This is a memoir, which I like because it's kind of her true story. She doesn't have to make up the facts. This is really what her true experience was. And the other thing is that when she's writing the book, she's about 30. So she is kind of able to show the change, how her grief has evolved over time. It also speaks here and there. She had two younger sisters, and so it talks about their relationship as they're grieving, and also the way that they kind of all grieve differently. I have just a little picture from the book over on the side because I wanted you to kind of get a feel for what this graphic novel looked like. And so the top says what I wish my grief looked like and what it actually looks like. And so just to kind of show the differences, but I like it because it's very realistic. I think she had these expectations of what being a grieving person would be, and she kind of shows over and over that it was different than what she expected. This also has a really beautiful section at the beginning that talks about her mom, and shares memories of her mom. And actually at the end of the book, there are real, actual, not drawn, actual photographs of Tyler and her mom and the family, with a few comments. So I really like this book. I think it's appropriate for all teens, and honestly, anybody who's grieving. Obviously, when her mom died, she was 19, but she was the oldest of the three siblings. And like I said, it kind of touched a little bit on the younger teens. But the way that it's written is very accessible to any griever and to any age teen. And there's no themes that I think are inappropriate for any age. Next up, we have I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. This was another one that I absolutely loved. This one focuses on sibling loss. The main character, Julia, her older sister died suddenly. She is Mexican American. She lives in Chicago. And really, this story explores a lot about the identity of being a Mexican American person. Her parents were immigrated here from Mexico. They're undocumented, and so there are some themes around that in their journey here. This one has a pretty significant content warning, trigger warning. So I would probably gear this one pretty exclusively towards older teens. It's alcohol use, drug use, sexual behavior, and there is a pretty troubling experience that is described in the book. Not in great detail, but enough that I probably wouldn't want younger eyes to see it. This is says, I am not your perfect Mexican daughter. So basically we have these two contrasting stories where Julia's older sister, Olga, is kind of the perfect daughter. She's respectful and quiet and, does everything with her mom. She's religious. They're a Catholic family. And really it's just exploring how Julia just sees herself different. She has different ambitions and aspirations. She's very intelligent. She's a great student, a great writer, and it's exploring her journey that she doesn't want to follow in the path that her sister was following. She wanted something different for herself. And so these kind of cultural conflicts that she is experiencing with her parents, that they want her to follow in the path of her sister and to do the things that are kind of expected of the perfect Mexican daughter. There is also a suicide attempt. So definitely another trigger warning for that. But it's so much about identity, and it's about these relationships she has with her friends who are kind of helping her navigate some of this grief. And it's also about her relationship with her mom and even her dad to some extent, of kind of watching them deal with their grief and how that affects her, and how they're able to kind of eventually come to speak to each other. A really beautiful story. I definitely highly recommend this. I would also recommend, I listened to this one on the audiobook, and it was really nice because there's a few times throughout the book where there are phrases like Julia's mom or another character says something in Spanish. So it's just nice to hear it the way it's meant to be said, instead of with my non-Spanish speaking accent. Yeah, great one. Recommend this one. I didn't say I don't think that this is by Erica Sanchez. And then last up, we have Resball. This was one that was not originally on my list, but I'm so glad I read it. This does have a content warning for alcohol use. And in fact, it kind of explores some of the challenges of growing up on a reservation and some of the issues with alcoholism that affect many of the indigenous tribes in the United States. This specifically follows the Ojibwe tribe in Minnesota. And it follows Trey, who is a rising basketball star. His older brother died in a car accident. And he basically has always lived in his brother's shadow. And even before he had other interests, before he played basketball, he was into, video games and comic books, which is a theme throughout the book. But this really shows how he's able to kind of live for his brother's memory, but also being able to be his own unique individual. And I love that this explores kind of that dynamic. It also speaks a lot to his indigenous culture, some of the challenges that he faces as an indigenous person. And of course, the author, Byron Graves, is a member of the Ojibwe tribe. So he is speaking from his own life experience. And in fact, at the end of the book, it kind of shares a little bit about his experience growing up playing basketball. This one would definitely be appropriate for younger teens. Trey in the book is in his sophomore year of high school, and his brother passes away during his freshman year. And so it kind of follows his journey over the next year and a half or so as he's developing his basketball skills and processing this grief. But I like that this book, while it is a grief book, it is definitely, him processing his grief feelings and his grief experiences. It kind of touches on those things in a delicate way while kind of just telling the story. So I like that it talks about, his brother was a star in the town on the reservation. He had this group of friends who they had all played basketball together since they were young. And so again, it's kind of Trey kind of trying to fit in, to kind of fit in his brother's shoes, but while still maintaining his own identity. Love this one. Okay, and now I'm just going to put a little plug in for these 4 books, which are not available at the library, but you can buy them online. The first 2 are journals. They're kind of like guided journals. The first is Fire in My Heart, Ice in My Veins. And the second is the Chill and Spill Journal. These ones are great to give to teens to kind of give prompts and ideas to kind of process and get their feelings out. They're not so in your face with grief that it's overwhelming. It really is just kind of a nice place for them to be able to process their thoughts and feelings and identify their support system. The next one is Healing Your Grieving Heart for Teens, which is 100 Practical Ideas. It's by Alan Wolfelt. He wrote several of these versions of the book. There's just a general one, and then there's one for like different types of losses. What I like about these is that it has kind of like a journal topic or like a food for thought meditation type thing. And then it has like what to do next, like where do you go from here, which is the practical ideas part. So I actually really highly recommend this one, especially if you have a teen that maybe is looking for like prompts or you can start the conversation or just to kind of have them have something that can help them process and acknowledge, validate what they're going through. And then last is The Grieving Teen, a guide for teenagers and their friends. This was a new book to me as I was kind of looking through these grief books, but it is really good. It's broken down like to really like itty bitty chapters with lots of different themes. And it really just kind of talks about the whole journey of, having the person die, the funeral memorial service, and then kind of different grief challenges that you might face. And I like too that it says a guide for teenagers and their friends, because I think so often it's so hard to know, how do I support my friend who's grieving? And this really gives you insight into what the grieving teen might be thinking and feeling and dealing with. If you're the friend, maybe you've never been to a funeral before, you don't know what it means to be cremated, whatever. And it helps kind of identify and explain some of those terms. So that's just a quick plug for some additional books that might be helpful to teens as they grieve. And then lastly, just a few websites and podcasts. The side on the right, that's Grief Out Loud, Teens Talk Grief, and Open to Hope, are some podcasts. The first one is Grief Out Loud, is through the Deggy Center, which you see their regular website on the other side. I gave this link for the kids' books as well. I also should have told you that the first section of this presentation was from a resource from the Deggy Center about the developmental stages of grief. But they have like tip sheets, resources for parents and grandparents, for kids themselves. They have activities. It's a great website. What's Your Grief is not specific to teens, but it again has great articles and a lot of information that I think could be helpful, especially for a teen who really wants facts and information about grief. I think this could be a helpful website for them. And then Hospice of the Valley has a whole section on teen grief resources, and again kind of focuses on like the education about what teens might be experiencing. And then I just put a few important phone numbers. So if you are experiencing a mental health emergency, contact 988 or the RACSB Emergency Services line, which is listed there. So if you are struggling with suicidal thoughts or behaviors and need some additional support, those are important numbers to have. And that's it. So I know that was a lot. I kind of dumped all my book information on you. But Jody, please let me know if there were any questions. And I really hope that even if you're not a teen, that you would think about reading some of these books if you have a teen, so you could really get an idea to try to understand what your teen might be experiencing.
I'm not seeing any questions, so if you don't mind just giving it one more minute and we'll see if anyone adds anything.
Sounds good.
Please feel free to ask Mary a question about teen grief. And as a reminder, she is doing one more presentation with us, and that will be on Tuesday, August 5th, which is at the same time of 11 to 12. And this last presentation will be on Shock of Shocks, Grieving for Adults.
Good way to complete our series. I will just put a plug into that part of my work is to do grief education like this. So if you are interested in having me speak at your church or school or community organization, I would certainly love to do that. And then we do have some grief support groups that are ongoing, and we have a few more that are going to be up and running in the next month or two. So if you look on the Mary Washington Grief Support Services website and don't see a group that pertains to you, check back in about a month or so, because I bet it'll be there. And you can always send me an email. It's mary.bevan, my name, which you see there, at mwhc.com.
Hold on one second. I will put that in the comments.
Great. Thank you.
Sorry. Do forgive me. I did not have it up.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, sorry. My computer is... Right. So yes, I have posted Mary's name and her contact email in the chat. A comment, sorry, not chat. I'm used to a different kind of online. And so if you have any questions or requests for her, please feel free to contact her. And if there's not any more questions or comments, I'm going to say that we are going to say goodbye to you for the time. All right. Well, Goodbye. Thank you for joining. And also, once again, thank you, Mary, for agreeing to do this presentation for us.
Thank you.